Okay, in this tutorial we're going to talk about writing to a list and reading from a list in Python, and those are going to be written to an external text file. So the program that we've got is a blood donors file. The way it works is that we can add blood donors and they get added to a separate text file here, and we can also find blood donors. So if we want to add a blood donor, we might say, hey, what's your name? William, enter your heights, enter your weight, enter your blood group, say O minus, and then that finishes the program. If we rerun the program, what should happen is if we press find blood donors, we should be able to put O negative, and my results should come up in the list. I'm going to talk you through how you might just isolate certain elements. So you might just want to isolate the first name and also the blood group, or you might want to isolate, say, their first name, their weight, and their blood group. But let's talk through that from scratch then. So let's just close all of this down. And we've got a Python window open here. Let's just increase the size slightly. And we're just going to go to File and New, and that will give us a new Python file. So the first thing we're going to need to do is collect in a load of details. So let's say, for example, their name would be useful. So what is your name? I'm going to cast this into title case so that the first letter of each word is always in capitals. Height, which is an integer, and that might be useful if you want to do calculations later. Enter your height in centimeters and up to the nearest centimeter. We won't really talk about how to use try and except to handle integers here, because that's something that we've talked about in other tutorials, so you can go ahead and have a look at those. At the moment, we're just taking them in, and it won't handle any erroneous data. Kilograms, rounded up to the nearest kg. Okay, and there's two brackets at the end because that's also an integer. And then we're going to take the blood group. Notice that I'm using all lowercase and then camel casing for my variables. Please enter your blood group, and you might just want to give them the options. So A plus, A negative, B positive, B negative, O positive, O negative, AB positive, AB negative. And if you want them to enter it on a new line, you can do \n, and that will give them a new line to enter their blood group on. Okay, now we want to write this to a text file. So we're going to make a temporary list called list to write. You can call it temp list. I'll call mine list to write. List to write equals, actually list to write dot append, and we're going to start adding to this empty list all these different variables. So we're going to append name, and then we're going to append height, weight, and blood group in that order. Okay, blood group. And just check that our spelling of the variables is correct. So we're going to run this now. It'll ask us to save it. I'm just going to save it to, let's see, documents. Do I have a coding project here? I'll make a new one for coding projects. And we're going to call this blood donors. Notice also the use of lowercase and camel case in there as well, just to keep that consistent. Okay, coding projects, save. And this should now run. What is your name? James. Enter your height, 180. Enter your weight, 87. enter your blood group, A positive, enter. What that should do is, if we go back into documents and coding projects, that should have created me a text file, and in there I should have all my details. Now the reason why it's not there is because whilst we've appended everything to our list, we haven't yet written it to our file. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to open a file. So I'll just do that using new file. It doesn't really matter what you call it here, I suppose. You could call it blood file equals open, or donor file, so donor file equals open, and we're going to give it a name, blood donors. Yeah, let's just keep the casing consistent again, blooddonors.txt, so that's the name of the file, and we're going to open that in append mode. And the reason why append mode is really important is because you want to continuously add new things to your list. Then we're going to write, so donor file equals donor file.write. I'm going to write a, you could say write a new line. Let's try it without for now. And let's just do new file.write and see what happens. We have to cast our list here into a string, because file writing in Python, it'll only really let you write a string. So I'm going to write in list to write. So what that does is I've opened a file called blooddonors.txt in append mode. We're going to come back to this later. I'm going to write in this list that should have name, height, weight, and blood group in there. And from there, we're going to write it as a string, and then we're going to close it. That should be donor file. Donor file dot close. Key mistake that a lot of students make is that they forget to put the brackets for close. It's a function, so you need to close that. Now let's try it again. Same thing. James, 180 centimeters, 87 kilos, A positive, enter. And that should have written it to a file in here. And you'll see it right there. So if we double click that, you'll see that it's all written to a file. Let's just try adding another user and see where that user's input. So what is your name? Let's say Henrietta, 195, 90, and she's going to be A positive as well. Yeah. It won't have updated because we've got our text file open. So now if we have a look at it, so what you'll see is that it's appended this essentially right next to James, and we don't really want that. We do want it on a new line. So after it's written, we want to write a new line. Yeah, so that would be why I kind of preempted that. After we've written this line here, we're going to do a line break, and we're going to write in just /n. And what that will do is it will keep writing each list on a new line. So let's save James. Okay. What's your name? Miriam. 140, 65 kilos, A positive. And what should happen is Miriam should be on the next line down, and she's not. So let's have a look at why that might be. Let's delete it once again, save it. Okay. So the reason why Miriam is not on a new line is because we've added the new line below here. Now you've got a few things here. If you do the line break before this, then what's going to happen is the first time you write to that file, you're going to get an empty line on the first line. But I suppose we can sort that out later. So if the file doesn't exist, then what we can do is we can open it in write mode. Otherwise, we'll open it in append mode, and that way the first time we do it, it'll write it on one line, and every time after that it'll write a new line first, and then it will write this list. Okay, let's try that again. Here 74, 65, and we're going to put A plus. Okay, so what should happen is if we look in here, underneath James, we'll see Wahida. You'll notice that there is a line break now. Appears to be too many line breaks. This is an interesting one. Why would that be? I imagine it was because when we closed the file last time, it's where you leave the mouse. So if we leave it here, then it'll do the line break, whereas if we do it here, it probably doesn't need it. I think it's because we already had line breaks in here. Yeah, we already had a line break there. So let's just, I mean, we had a line break there, so we essentially just added another one. Save it. Let's just rerun it, and I'm sure it'll be fine. Enter your name. Mike. 175, 78, A positive, and what we should find is that Mike is in there on a new line. Okay, cool, we've sorted that, and it'll effectively work from then onwards. Okay, so we've got that all working. Now what we need to do is we need a way to output all of our donors at some point. So let's say, for example, let's just rerun it and add a few more people into here. Ansha, 165, 65, A minus. We could even put it just temporarily in a while true. So we can indent this and just put it in a while loop so that it continuously asks us for new users. This is just so we can populate the text file with some more details, yeah? Harry, 165, 55, AB positive, and then it just keeps asking us for more, and this is quite useful when we're testing our program. 175, 76, AB negative. Okay, so if you want to break, then we'll just press Control C, and that'll break our program. In here, we should have all our details, and it's starting to stack up. When we've got some details, then we can start to actually have one part of the program which is to add donors, and one part of the program which is to find donors. So we can just start adding you know, our find donors here. So let's say, for example, you want to find someone. You could set that out as criteria, or is find a keyword? No. So let's say we'll put find donor equals input. What blood group are you looking for? And then we're going to say we're going to open up our file, so the same way that we did previously. New donor file equals open, and we're going to open in our blood donors.txt, and this time we're going to open it in read mode because we're trying to find something now. So we don't need to append or write, we're just opening it in read mode. And then we can use this neat for loop, which is for line in donor file, which essentially says for every line in the donor file, so check every line, if find donor is in that line, then we can say that a new list now called user details equals eval of line. To make it, I suppose, make a bit more sense, you could have I don't know, let's call this, yeah, donor details. So donor details equals, and we'll create an empty list first. That just helps us read our code. So here we're creating an empty list, and here we're saying populate that list, the empty list, with the line where the donor is found. Yeah, so anytime we find a donor which matches this criteria, it's going to evaluate that line and put it into donor details. And we can print that out. We can say also print out donor details as well. And then at the end, we're just going to close it. Yeah, so we're going to do donor file dot close. Remember to always close our file. Okay, so what this is going to do is going to ask us first to add a user, and then it's going to ask us if we want to find a user, and we'll separate that out into separate procedures later. Okay, let's run it. So what's your name? Jennifer. What's your height? 165, 55, O negative. So that's this part of the program where we've got our adding, and then we're going to go to the donors now. So what blood group are you looking for? So I think we added quite a few A positive, so we put A plus, and then what that's done is for every line where there is an A plus, it's actually written it to donor details and then printed it out. In this case there's 2 found, so donor details becomes this first and prints it out, and then donor details is actually overwritten and it prints that out. Let's say, for example, you only want to print out certain details, so you only want to print out, say, Mike, or the name, and also the blood group. In which case what you've got is you've got this element here, which is 0, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3. So you're printing out 0 and 3. So I believe what we can do is we can do print donor details here, and we can do 0, and then we can also do comma donor details 3. I think that'll put a space in between each one. Let's just run it. Giuseppe 154, 55, and they're going to be A positive, just to check that it works. What blood group are you looking for? A positive. And what that does is it prints out the names and then also the blood groups right next to them. Okay, now comes a bit whereby you don't really want it to run add donors and find donors in the same loop. You probably want to separate them out. So the way that we're going to do that is by separating it out using procedures. So here we're going to call this def add donor, and this one here we're going to call this procedure def find donor, and then we can call them when we wish to call them. At the moment, if we just run the program, nothing happens until we call add donor. Still nothing happens. That's interesting. What is wrong there? Just rerun it. Donor. Yeah, it runs. But that's a really long way to run the program. What we actually want is some kind of menu system. So we're going to build a simple menu system here. So we've got all our procedures declared at the top, so we can call them later. Welcome to the blood donors program. And do you want to find a donor, or do you want to A, add a donor, or B, find a donor? You know, we can probably put this straight into an input and do a task equals input actually. So it asks us, do you want to A, add a donor, or B, find a donor? That's fine. And we could put in a what could we do here? This is interesting. We could put in, say, a dot lower here. That will ease our data entry a bit. So we can say if task equals, or if task in add, and I'm going to put a add list here and also a donor list here. And what we've got here is we're just going to put in some possibilities for what people might add in if they want to add. They're either going to put in add or a, or I don't know, add a donor, yeah. And then in the donor list, they might put in the letter B. Notice it's all in lowercase because we're casting it to lowercase. Other than B, they might put in find, or they might put in find, add a donor or find a donor. Okay, so find a donor. There we go. So those are possible lists. So we've said if the task is in add list, effectively they're saying that they want to add a donor. Yeah? And then else, they want to find a donor. Okay? I mean, if you were going to do this correctly, you might say elif task in donor list, find a donor, and else might be just to loop right back to the top and restart all of this. So in order to do that, you might call this main actually. So this is our main loop, dot main, and we indent all of this. We say, okay, if they enter anything instead of add or find, we're just going to loop back to the top, and we're going to say print that was not recognized. Please enter A or B. Okay, right. So now nothing happens because we haven't actually called main yet. We need to call it for the first time here. Call the main loop. Okay. Do you want to A, add a donor, or B, find a donor? Let's do B, find a donor, and let's do A positive. And what that should do is it's printing out all the donors with their blood group. What happens if we try to find a donor but they don't exist? So let's say, for example, we put in B negative, which I don't think I've used. So B negative. Ah, okay. So it's found AB negative. This causes us some issues which we might want to evaluate later on. So what has happened here is because B negative is part of AB negative, it's found it and it's outputted it anyway. So how do we get around that? I suppose what we can do is they found the donor based on the blood group, but we need to do one final check if actually donor details, the blood group is what we've asked for in find donor. So here we can do if donor details element 3 is actually equal to find donor, because here we're saying if it's in the line, but now we're saying if it's exactly the same as find donor, then we output it. Yeah, which raises the question, well, what happens if it doesn't find it, which is what we're trying to explore in the first place. So let's just try that. I want to find a donor, it's B negative, nothing happens. So I suppose you could enter some error messages there. So for line in donor file, if donor in line, we print this out. And I suppose if it's not found, then what we need to do is we need to say that that person cannot be found or that no blood groups exist. In order to do that, we need to create a flag. So let's create a flag here. And our flag is just going to be found equals false. Yeah? For line in donor file, so if it does find someone and this happens, effectively what we've got is found equals true. Yeah? Then over here we can say if found equals false, then we can say print no such donors exist. Yeah, and that should tell the user that we start off as found is false, and you can actually say if not found. That would be more Pythonic, easier to read. If not found. So found is false. If they find it, they print it, and found becomes true. Otherwise, if they don't find it, so if not found, print no such donors exist, close the donor file. Okay, let's have a look at that. So let's do it again. We're going to find a donor, B, and what we're looking for, B minus. No such donors exist. And that is effectively the whole program. I think that covers quite a lot in terms of storing details in variables. So storing donor details in variables, appending these to a list, appending donor details to a list, writing the donor details list to a text file. You could say casting the list to a string so it can be written before writing. Here we could say that this is finding donor details. So I suppose you could say procedure to add donors, procedure to find donors, and then here we've got what we're searching for, open, found is false, this is like a Boolean flag. Okay, if a suitable donor was found. For line in donor file, check every line to find a donor. This effectively print their name and blood group. Set flag to true. If not found, print no such donors exist, close the file. This main menu is quite self-explanatory. This is a list of possible answers. List of possible answers. Yeah. This calls add donor. I'm just commenting this so that you can understand it. Theoretically, what you should be doing is when you comment your code, you should be commenting why you've done it this way, not just what the code does, because the code explains what the code does anyway, and when you're doing your documentation, you're going to document it. So these comments should really explain why you've done it. But for this kind of intro tutorial, I've made it so that this is easy to understand for everyone. Okay, that's the end of the tutorial. It's been quite long, but hopefully that helps you understand file writing, writing to files, and also reading from files. That's it.